Hey guys, it's Courtney, back with another video using the latest Simon Says stamp card kit. Starting off with 2 pieces of Nina Solar white 80-pound cardstock, and I die cut both of them with the largest stitched rectangle die, also by Simon. And I'm also going to die cut a circle off of one of those panels. Just laying that one panel on top of the other and just tracing my circle with my pencil just to kind of give me a guide as to where I need to stamp. I'm going to be stamping with blackout ink by Ink on 3 because it's Copics safe. I realized that my circle was not quite big enough to fit this entire sign. So I'm going to mask out a little bit of the bottom, and this will pretty much be where my snow is. And I'm just using Eclipse masking paper for this. Then I will go ahead and stamp my image. A lot of the bottom will be cut off in order to get that whole sign in there. And I'm also going to stamp my image onto a piece of Simon Says stamp masking paper because I'm going to do just a little bit of ink blending in the background. Simon Says stamp masking paper is my go-to, especially if I'm doing any kind of ink blending. It's tackier than most masking papers that I've used, but not too tacky where it's going to tear your paper. So this is definitely my go-to. Once I fussy cut that out, I'll go ahead and align this up. Now, if you have trouble lining something like this up, which can be a little bit tricky, being it's kind of long and skinny, you can cut the mask into separate pieces. I've done that before. This one I could kind of twist and turn and make it work, but I have cut my masks before just to kind of make it easier on myself. I'm going to go ahead and erase my pencil lines because I am going to be putting Distress Oxides down. A lot of times when you put ink down, no matter what kind of ink it is, you'll have trouble erasing those pencil lines if you're able to at all. So I'm just going to use some tumbled glass Distress Oxides, starting off from the top of where my circle will be and kind of working my way down, not fading off completely to white, but the bottom part is definitely lighter than the top. I just placed my other panel on top just to make sure that my entire circle will be covered, being I erased those pencil lines. I don't know where my circle will be. So once I was happy with the placement and the coverage of my Distress Oxides, I'll go ahead and carefully remove my masks. You may want to give this a couple minutes to dry depending on how much oxides you put in the background. In this case, I only put a little bit, so I didn't have a problem. We'll move on to the Copic coloring, which I kept super simple, and I stuck to all blues and blue-greens with the exception of every other stripe I did make white, and I did do a little bit of shading with my C markers on either side. If you watched yesterday's video, I'm doing my shading the same exact way as far as where my shadows and where my highlights will be, only I used pencils yesterday, and obviously the colors are going to be a little bit different. And this is obviously not a one-layer card, which I tend to go to. I like the clean and simple look, which this still has. It just has a little bit of dimension. I enjoy one-layer cards. I like building scenes. It makes you feel artistic, even though I have no artistic ability at all. A lot of my scenes involve straight lines, and I can build you any scene you want as long as I'm able to use my ruler. And it's cheaper. Dies are very expensive, so I don't have nearly as many dies as I do stamps and other materials, you know, mediums as far as Copics and pencils and things like that. So it's just easier for me and cheaper to build one-layer cards. So we're going to move on to the little signs here, and I'm sticking to 2 different color combinations. The top and the bottom sign are going to be my BG markers, and the middle sign I'll be using my B90 markers. Starting off with my lightest color just to kind of get this paper saturated, the BGs that I'm using. Sometimes I have a hard time blending, especially when I go from the 13 to the 11 or the 10. The 11 and 10 are very, very similar to one another, so I kind of use them interchangeably. So I always kind of saturate my paper a little bit just to make my blending a little bit easier. And I am using flicking motions again, only to make my blending easier. You're not going to see these flicks. I'm going to blend them all out. But sometimes when you do that flicking motion, it just makes that blend a little bit more seamless. So like I said, for this bottom side, I'll move back into those BG markers. Again, laying down that BG10 just to get that paper saturated a little bit. Darkest color is the BG18, then the BG15, 13, and then back to the 10. I did add just a little bit of shading on that top part underneath that little ball that's on top, going back to my B90 markers, and I just used 2 colors. It's such a tiny area that I wasn't really worried about getting too much dimension here. So once my coloring was done, I'm going to switch over to my VersaFine Onyx black ink, and I'm going to line up some of these little sentiments that are part of the stamp set that are made to fit into these little signs. And I switched it up a little bit from yesterday, and this will say "This way to Santa's workshop," and that little 2 in the middle sign there seemed kind of empty. So I took the little teeny tiny snowflake that's from the set and just stamped that on either side just to kind of fill in that empty space. Lining this up just to make sure everything looks right. Again, it is off to the left a little bit. And I did add a little bit of a shadow with my C3, blended that out with the C1. Then I'm going to go in with my colorless blender just to kind of soften up those edges a little bit. And next I will go ahead and adhere this main panel down to a top folding A2 size note card flat down with my Tombow Mono multi glue, and kind of line that circle up, make sure everything's going to fit before I pop on my adhesive. And I'm just going to cover up the entire panel with my Scotch foam tape. Once I did this, I realized I put the Scotch foam tape on the wrong side. So the stitching is still there, but it's not as noticeable had I put it on the correct side. But I'll go ahead and pop that right on top of my other panel there. And being I die cut this with the same die, it was very easy to line up. For my sentiment, I wanted this to match the colors that I used on the sign itself. And I didn't have any cardstock that matched it perfectly. So what I did is I took a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock for some fixing up some smudges, because you know me, I always have smudges. And I'm just going to take my BG13, which is one of the midtones, and I'm just going to pretty much color the bottom part of my cardstock there. You want to make sure, even though alcohol ink will dry fast, you want to make sure that this is completely dry before you put embossing powder on it. Even if you use your anti-static tool and your Versamark or any other embossing ink, it won't stick if the paper is still wet. So you'll be able to tell because it will be cold. It will feel cold to the touch. So just give it a minute before you add your embossing powder. So I did treat this with my anti-static tool, stamped both of my sentiments with Versamark ink, and I'll sprinkle on some white embossing powder and heat set that. Once that was heat set, I'll cut this into teeny tiny strips. And I'm going to want this to be right underneath my little circle there, but I've already added dimension. So I don't want to add too much dimension or else it's not going to go through the mail. So I'm going to line up the first part of the sentiment, kind of overlapping that circle just a little bit. So I took a real teeny tiny piece of Scotch foam tape and put that right in the middle on the top where it's going to be on the circle itself, I guess, which is already popped up. And then just use my Tombow Mono multi glue on either side where it'll be laying flat on the card. Laid the other strip down with my Tombow Mono multi glue flat down to my card panel. I took a Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen just to add a little bit of shimmer to the sign. Now mine leaked out a little bit, and this has probably happened to everybody. Usually it's very noticeable if you let it dry, but if you just dab it up with your finger really quickly and then just kind of scribble your pen on a scratch piece of paper, you'll be fine. Added a few glitter Nuvo drops, and that is it. That is the card. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, and have a great day. Bye.